two verses out of the book of Ephesians. I'm going to read those verses to you. It's from Ephesians chapter 4, verses 18 and 19. I want you to listen to this, because when I go through this with you, what you're going to see is Satan has a template, a kind of a cutout that he uses for everybody. He doesn't do anything new. He doesn't have to. Satan knows people. He knows us really well. I remember watching television shows. I really liked Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, and he'd go to all these places. He'd be in Africa, or he'd come, over to America, or he'd go to Mexico. He'd go anywhere, and he could pick up a snake somewhere over any part of the world, and he'd pick up and he'd go, oh, this is this kind of snake, and it does this, and it has this kind of venom, and it, grows to be this long, and he knew everything about it because he knew reptiles, he knew snakes. And you know what? Satan is just like that with people. He knows us, and no matter where we're at, he just knows us. He knows, well, see, people in this part of the world, they get kind of dragged down by this, and this is what I'm going to tempt them with. And see, people over in this part of the world, well, they get tempted with this, and I'm going to use this to get them. But there's really no new things that he does. It's always the same cutout, the same template that he uses for everybody. And we're going to look at it. This is his master strategy that he uses for every person, and Paul kind of tells us exactly what it is. It's in, like I said, in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 18 and 19. Listen to these verses. He says, they are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality, so as to indulge in every kind of impurity with a continual lust for more. So in that, there's this strategy, this plan that Satan uses for every person. The very first part of the plan is the darkening of our understanding. That's what Satan wants to do. I've been preaching for almost 20 years now, which really stinks. This is not gray hair, it's blonde. It just looks gray in the light. I call it platinum sometimes. It's not gray. But I've been doing it for a while. I've been around it for a long time, and I have had some situations that have been kind of ripped your heart out of your chest kind of scenarios and difficult things. I've seen guys that have been in really great positions of leadership in the church, and I've seen them fall because Satan got to them. And here's the deal. It began with this. It began with their understanding getting clouded. Their understanding began to grow dark. And Paul says that's where it all starts. That's how Satan starts with everybody. He begins to get you to think that it's not so bad to cheat on your wife, or it's not so bad to look at pornography, or it's not so bad to do this or that. And you begin to get cloudy and fuzzy on what's right and what's wrong, and your understanding is darkened, and you're not thinking biblically or Christ-like. You're not thinking through the mind of Christ. You're thinking in a different way, because Satan works at darkening your understanding. The second thing that Paul talked about in that verse was the hardening of the heart. When our understanding begins to grow dark, our hearts begin to harden up. And when our hearts grow hard, it's really, really difficult for Christ to penetrate through that. It's not that he can, but it's much more difficult. And so Satan is almost kind of there at the goal, because he's got a goal, just like some grocery store, that puts a product on their shelf. That product got there because some company said, I want that product to be on their shelf, and I want it to look this way at the end of the day. And to get it to that way was a whole bunch of steps to get there. But Satan's got an end game with every person, with all of us. His end game, his product for all of us is destruction. But this is the way that he gets there. He darkens our understanding, and our hearts grow hard. The next part of this process, this template that he uses on every person, the next part of this is that we lose sensitivity. Paul talks about having a loss of sensitivity. People that aren't thinking biblically, aren't thinking through the mind of Christ, and their hearts have grown hard, people that are at that stage, they only begin to think about themselves. The only thing they're thinking about is, how does this benefit me? How does this make me feel? How is this gonna make me, better or whatever? They don't think out of their own heart or their own life in any way. Sometimes it's even in families and marriages and kids and whatever. It's just that person can only see themselves, and they've lost sensitivity to everybody else and everything else. And that's part of the template. He's darkened their understandings. Their hearts have grown cold, and now they're just not sensitive to anything. And the final thing is, he says that you have this indulgence in sensuality, this immersion in sensuality. And you can kind of see people that get to a point where I don't care about anything. When they have not been thinking straight, their hearts have grown hard. They're not sensitive to anybody else's needs or wants, including God. Those kind of people usually just totally dive head into whatever is going to make them feel better. So maybe it's some kind of an addiction like drugs or alcohol or pornography or whatever, and they're just going to indulge themselves, immerse themselves in sensuality, whatever form it may be. That's part of the template. Satan is helping them along that path. He's putting all those things in their way. The last part of that is the end game. After Satan has walked people through that, and it's not something that happens overnight, it's usually a very gradual thing. The last step is spiritual destruction. And that's where ourselves, we are totally, completely lost in every way. And there's no, I remember when I was in college, I had to take several psychology classes. I took a normal psych class, an ab psych class, and a pastoral psych class, I don't know, whatever kind of class. I took all these psychology classes, but I remember one of my books, it was my abnormal psychology book, had this picture in it, way back in the book somewhere. It was a picture of this guy that was dead, and he was in a doorway, and he was in some city somewhere, and he had used up every vein in his body, and the only vein he had left was in his tongue, and he had a hypodermic needle sticking out of his tongue, and he was dead in this doorway because he had used drugs so much, he had destroyed his body, and he just literally was completely destroyed. He didn't do that because he, just wanted to kill himself. Satan helped him in that process. Satan has got a template that he uses with everybody. That's his goal. His goal is to destroy you, your family, your life, your marriage, everything he can take away he wants to do. And the reason he does that is because he has this burning hatred towards God the Father. He hates God the Father. He doesn't hate you. You're just a tool to help get back at God. That's all he cares about, is getting back at God. And it's really important for us to be aware, as Paul laid it out for us, of what his schemes are. And whenever we know a person, especially if they're a believer and they're in Christ, whenever we know somebody who is a follower of Jesus, and we see them to begin to get their understanding what used to be right, what stood for truth, really strong and bold, they start to waver on that. We got to be able to recognize there's a spiritual thing happening right now. There's something going on behind the scenes. And we got to step in as believers and say, hey, listen, I love you. I'm not going to let you do this. You know that's wrong. You know that that's not right. I love you too much to see this happen. And so we help people keep their understanding biblical, keep their understanding Christ-centered and Christ-focused. That's how we counteract Satan right at the beginning. Satan is always working, just like God is. God is always working in our lives as well, but Satan is always active, working, trying to counteract what it is that God is doing in people's lives. So that's what I wanted to share with you tonight. I think that, I think it's really, really awesome that Paul laid it out for us, because it's like he pulled back the curtain a little bit. He pulled back the cover and said, see, this is it. It's nothing, it's not some big, giant, scheme. You don't have to know algebra to figure out what Satan's trying to do. This is it. This is his scheme for every single person. Anyways, thanks for letting me share with you guys. It's kind of cool to be able to do this.